rest of us aboard. I do really appreciate it.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Good morning.
Y'all, please forgive us. We had some technical difficulty at first, but we are in here now.
Sounds like a plan. What's up, James?
How you doing,
time.
Tony?
Good morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Gosh, that's some good looking people in this room. Wow, looky there. And let me get my mirror. And I see Kelly, and I see William, and I see Tony, and Tanya.
Yes, he is.
Now we're going to get for lamb chops.
He's on there too.
Understand? I'm going to say, you do this. Let me put this on my Bluetooth.
Can y'all hear me?
2 hours.
Afternoon, everyone. Can y'all hear me?
Hello. Yes, yes, yes.
Hey, Donna Thigpen's name's coming up under my name, but that's not my name. My name's Texie Warnick. I'm using Donna's computer. I don't know if that's why it's showing up, but I was trying to see if I'm gonna rename it. Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and go silent. If that's okay with you that way. But I'll come off of it if those people come to write.
We're running a little behind, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Texie Warnick. I'm the committee chairman of the Fair Housing, and on behalf of the Fair Housing Subcommittee, welcome. And I would like to let you all know that I think we may have a few more people coming in. Right now it's showing 22 participants, but hopefully we'll get more. A little bit about the committee. We're a society that values each person, demands that all people in the society have the same opportunities and privileges. Owning real property and home ownership is considered the American dream. Fair housing makes sure that everyone, no matter their color, social status, or religion, can enjoy the benefits. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed discrimination in the sale, leasing, and financing. We have come so far, but have so much farther to go. The goal is to make fair housing not just law, but the way of life in every community. Today, we have some amazing guest speakers. We have Brian Green with NAR, Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Lila Hackett, she's the director of the North Alabama Fair Housing Center. Jack Evans, who's the education specialist for North Alabama Fair Housing.
Hey, baby. Yeah, problems.
Can you hear me?
Using attention.
I'm sorry. I don't think everybody's muted. I was hearing some background noise. We have Jack Evans, who's the education specialist of North Alabama Fair Housing. Tony Alvarez with State of Minority Real Estate. Marcus Brown is president of the Birmingham Realtors Association. Jack Hung is national president of the Asian Real Estate Association of America. I'm not sure if Commissioner Tyson will be joining us today. Last I heard that she would not be joining us.
Commissioner Tyson is currently in the planning meeting, so she's going to try to tune out if she can. If not, then we'll just move forward.
Okay. First speaker of today then is going to be Brian Green, NAR Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Is Brian here?
I'm right here.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
I'm great.
We'd like to welcome you to our summit, and any information you can share with us will be greatly appreciated.
Great. Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. And this is certainly an interesting time to be talking about fair housing. And I would have to say it's the right time. And it so happens that a lot of events have conspired to put fair housing issues front and center in our country right now. I'm proud to be part of the National Association of REALTORS and to have joined the National Association of REALTORS last year when not everyone was talking about this issue, but when the National Association of REALTORS realized that it needed to place a greater priority on fair housing. Certainly, issues of racial equity have been an important concern of the National Association of REALTORS for years. We've had diversity committee for years. It was even called the Equal Opportunity Committee before that, going back decades. But last year, there was a recognition of the need to make the specific issue of fair housing more intentional. And so I joined NAR as its first director of fair housing. It had a diversity committee, and that diversity committee continues. But last year, what NAR did was it created a fair housing committee specifically looking at the issue of compliance with the Fair Housing Act, separate and apart from the important but related issue of diversity and inclusion among its membership, recognizing that regardless of background, there's a Fair Housing Act that's 50 plus years old that real estate agents need to comply with, and that we were going to place a greater priority both on ensuring compliance, but then beyond that, advocating on regulatory and legislative policy in the interests of NAR concerning fair housing. So we formed that committee last year. I came on as the staff executive for the committee and also our director of fair housing policy. And that was November 1st. And almost immediately after I joined, there was a very highly publicized story regarding discrimination out in Long Island that became a national news story about 15 days after I joined. And so many of the plans I had already on how I wanted to move NAR on fair housing issues, I had to accelerate. And in many ways, this news story, which was in New York Newsday in New York, well, I said that, New York Newsday out on Long Island, sort of highlighted for us some of the issues that we're still facing. And it's really from that I came up with a plan that the leadership team endorsed January of this year called the ACT Plan. And it's an acronym, ACT exclamation point, where the A stands for accountability, C stands for culture change, and T for training. And it was a recognition that all three of these things, almost like a triangle, have to happen for us to close in on equal opportunity, for us to realize truly the promise of the Fair Housing Act in the real estate profession. So I want to talk to you some about that ACT plan, but I also want to talk more broadly because while we as real estate professionals need to make sure there's no discrimination in the day-to-day work, that is really the bare minimum. We also need to recognize that we, as an association of 1.4 million members, need to affect policy nationally. Whether, whether it's coming out of federal agencies or whether it's in the Congress, that it's in the interest of realtors to promote policy that furthers home ownership opportunities for people of all backgrounds and a more diverse and inclusive America. So I want to talk some about that. And I want to say, since, you know, I know you all have also been talking about the impacts of COVID on fair housing, that COVID coming about in the United States in February and leading to shutdowns nationwide in March, kind of underscored, I think, for many of us, just how our separateness and the different circumstances that many people find themselves in, often based on race and national origin, really, in many ways, magnified the need for diverse, inclusive communities with equal opportunity, so that we don't have such disparate outcomes when it comes to health in this country. So all of those things have led to an awakening. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that in the midst of this COVID pandemic, we also saw the police killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others that caught national attention, that have underscored, again, just the different circumstances many of us live in based on race, and how that's been the dynamic in this country, in large part based on where we live. And that we, as the National Association of REALTORS, 2 years ago, when we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, acknowledge that realtors didn't just follow those segregation laws, but were part of writing them. And that we as realtors need to recognize not only does this continued state of affairs harm us, but that we're missing out on so much in this country, that we have an opportunity for greater prosperity for us all if we can overcome these barriers and this separation. So I want to talk a little bit about all of those things in the 15 minutes I have. So let me just quickly say that in the time that I've been with NAR, which is about 10 months now, we've done 2 surveys asking our members their understanding of discrimination in the United States. And we simply asked in a January survey just whether agents had witnessed discrimination in the past 2 years. And you could answer yes, you could answer no, or you could answer no, but I believe it still happens. In January, 8% of realtors said they had witnessed discrimination in the last 2 years. And then 59% said no, they had not. And then 33% said no, they had not, but they believe it still occurs. And I found that to be a very interesting result, because, I'm sure people answer truthfully. If only 8% had witnessed it, that's, I'm sure, what they observed. And for the remaining who didn't, I'm sure that's true too. But what surprised me was that only 33%, given the option to say no, but I believe it exists, only 33% said that. So you could say that the majority of our membership not only has not witnessed discrimination, but they don't acknowledge that it happens. I think most of you, I saw some heads shaking, saw the New York Newsday video, and maybe read the report. And even if you want to quibble about some of it, I think you'd be hard pressed to say that nothing in that report showed discrimination. So anyone who had seen that would, I think, have to acknowledge, yeah, it probably happens somewhere. And the fact that only 33% of our membership said that in January surprised me. We repeated this survey in June as part of another survey and asked these questions again. And the numbers changed a little bit, but not dramatically. 13% said that they had personally experienced witnessed discrimination in the last 2 years. and 49%, about half, said simply no, they hadn't, and 38% said no, but I believe it exists. So really only about a 5 percentage point change in acknowledgement among those who hadn't seen it, that discrimination still exists in the real estate market. So that concerns me. It concerns me, one, because I came on to do this work, and at least half of the members don't really think there's even a problem. And of course, that makes it more difficult to do this work. I would think it makes it more difficult even for your committee to demonstrate why you're doing this work. You know, it becomes even harder to do the policy work as well. So I just want to underscore that, because I think it means that despite the attention to these issues, we have an uphill battle. And I think part of that also recognizes that people may not even notice discrimination when it's occurring. When I look at that New York Newsday video, I have a hard time believing people engaged in those practices aren't aware that they're engaged in those practices, but I do believe it can happen. And for that reason, one of the focuses of our ACT program is to do a different kind of training. Many people after that New York Newsday video said, well, it shows we need to do more training. And of course, you know, we've been doing training for 50+ years, but I think we need to do a different kind of training. And for that reason, we emphasized implicit bias training, training that helps people recognize the ways in which they may be treating people differently that they had not noticed before. And to start off that implicit bias training, we posted a video on our website, a 50-minute video in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic that people could watch to begin to understand how implicit bias operates in the real estate market. And now we're engaged in course development so that we can do a 3-hour course that companies can do for their agents to go deeper. But if you haven't seen that 1 hour or 50-minute video, I highly commend it to you. It's at nar.realtor/fair-housing. And it's a wonderfully produced training video, 50 minutes, that gives you really the overview. Interestingly, some realtors said it's too long. And I think my response in return is, you're not going to get over implicit bias in 50 minutes. This is just the start. So, you know, it was also produced at a time when people were at home. So it's an opportunity for people to watch 25 minutes one day, 25 minutes another day, and begin to understand how implicit bias works and can affect what you're doing in a real estate transaction. And that's a lot of what we saw on New York Newsday. People telling African Americans one thing, whites other things. Sometimes maybe it was unintentional, like they would engage in a conversation about schools or about resale value or about crime with white applicants. But when an Hispanic applicant or an Asian applicant or a Black applicant came, that conversation didn't happen. Not that you should necessarily have that conversation, but they were talking differently to these different groups. And one thing that came to my mind is maybe because the schools that they were denigrating were minority schools, they didn't have that conversation with minority people and thought maybe they like these schools, so I'm not going to say this. We don't know. But some of that behavior may be unintentional, and it's helpful to, at a minimum, recognize how you could engage in that kind of behavior. Another training we're doing, we're calling it simulation, fair housing simulation training, where you online go through scenarios that are like a transaction. And the purpose of the simulation is to help you gauge how you should interact when certain questions are asked or when certain circumstances present themselves, so that you can begin to think these things through in real life situations. And I think that's helpful too, because very often people think they know everything there is to know about fair housing, like treat everyone well. But even this New York Newsday video showed that the trainings were often just very cursory and just said, don't discriminate, and many people believe there isn't more for them to learn. This kind of simulation helps people really think about situations. It confronts them with situations where they have to adhere to their fair housing principles. And it actually evaluates them as they go through it. And it looks at different issues in terms of reputation, legal risk, income loss that, you could face if you're turning away potentially qualified people. So it's a different way to help people think through these issues. So we think that's going to be helpful. So that's the training part. That's the T in ACT. Culture change. And all these really build on top of each other. Training's the bare minimum, right? Culture change, if people just did what they were supposed to do and embraced it, that would help with compliance. 52 years after the Fair Housing Act, we see there are a lot of folks who openly say in these videos, I'm not supposed to steer, but I'm going to. And so it suggests that not everyone's really embraced what it's about. And I thought it was particularly noteworthy that of the 12 companies that New York Newsday tested, 2 of the 12 they had no findings against. Now, it's alarming that 10 of the 12 they did, but the fact that there were 2 that they tested multiple times, tested multiple agents, and found nothing, to me, is good to know. That here are these companies responsible for half of the sales on Long Island, and 2 are doing something right that, when tested, nothing comes up. So I thought what we really need to do is highlight the leaders to show people that in the same market, there are folks who are prosperous and doing well by doing what they're supposed to do, what the law is required, what our code of ethics mandates. And so we're putting together a video of fair housing leaders for people to talk about why they follow the law they're supposed to follow, but also how it works and how, important it is, and how, some of these myths or whatever it is that motivates people to discriminate are just not a viable path. Along those same lines, we're doing a study to better understand why do people discriminate in 2020. You might have assumptions as to why they do. I know a lot of people I work with say, oh, well, it's because of this, or they're trying to get to the sale, and it's like, well, you're talking about this with this group and not this other group. Doesn't this other group care about schools? What's going on here? And we don't really have a methodical, systematic understanding of what leads some agents still to engage in these practices today. So we want to do that to better understand and better figure out how do we interrupt these issues. So that's just 2 examples of the kinds of things we're doing. We're looking at the whole schools question and how that's interacting with what real estate agents do. And is there better ways to ensure that we are not steering based on schools? And so that, many people have just been given like instructions, just don't talk about schools. And that may work in some places, but then they refer them to third-party sources that also steer people. And so we're looking at this bigger issue of schools. It'll take time, but we want to be able to provide better guidance in that area. And then finally, accountability. That's the A in ACT. And accountability is all about making sure that even if you're trained and even if you're doing your best, if you violate the law, that there's consequence. And or if you choose not to follow the law, willfully, that there's consequence. And we don't believe that in all states there are strong licensing laws that actually work to impose some consequence when the law is violated. And we as professionals want our profession to be held accountable to and held to the highest standard. We believe in this. We believe it harms our profession when people violate the law. And we also think it harms the country. It harms society, our communities, if people who are qualified to live somewhere are turned away. So we're looking at working with our state executives to examine the different laws. And we've actually done research, legal research on all the laws, and which have stronger provisions, which have, room for improvement. And we've done this methodically to provide to the state executives just a survey of what's out there and how different laws work, so that they can consider what they and their state legislatures could possibly do to ensure there's a strong, fair housing regime in their state laws. So that's just a sample. We're talking about doing self-testing as well. I see you have Lila Hackett here from a private fair housing group, whom I've worked with for a couple of decades now. But we want to find a way to support testing, self-testing, where companies who want to better understand what their agents are doing can engage this service. So we're exploring that right now. Like I said, this would be a voluntary self-testing program, but many people don't know what agents are doing. And often we don't know unless we have the benefit of comparing people's experiences. And that was one of the most notable things about the Newsday investigation. African Americans or Asians or Hispanics may have thought they were treated well, but it was only when they were brought in the room with the white tester and they looked at their the treatment that they discovered they weren't told about everything, or they were told that they needed to be approved when the whites weren't told that. So it's really only through that kind of testing often that you get that information. And that just leads me just to the broader policy and government engagement. We as NAR support testing, and we support more funding for testing. We believe that government doing this holds our industry accountable and creates a better industry. So we have supported more funding for HUD's Office of Fair Housing, and specifically for private fair housing groups who do testing. I think many agents believe testers are out there testing them all the time, and I imagine Lila can tell you that's not true. These groups don't get very much money to do testing. There's very, very little testing that goes on. But we can actually harness this to our benefit to do a better job. I've spoken for quite a while, so I don't want to go on too much longer. Let's just suffice it to say there's a whole range of policy issues that we need to do more on. Just yesterday, the New York Times ran a story about appraisals and the fact that African Americans find themselves, in homes that are being appraised at lesser amounts. And this was a really remarkable story because it also had the examples of biracial couples where when the African American person was home for the appraiser, it was appraised one way. When the white member of the couple was there for the reappraisal, $40,000 worth, the house is worth $40,000 more. Many African Americans, I think, have routinely learned to hide their pictures and other indicia of their backgrounds when they're refinancing and an appraiser is coming in, precisely for this reason. This shouldn't happen. If the whole point of home ownership is to build equity, everyone should be entitled to the proper equity in their homes. And the same home on two different dates shouldn't differ by $40,000 based on which household member is home or which pictures are seen in the house. So that's a huge problem, but one that's within our power to address. And so if we're pushing for greater minority home ownership, which we need to make sure that everyone's gaining the full benefit of that. Otherwise, we're still falling very, very short, and people are just being denied the fruits of home ownership, which are at the core of what NAR believes in. So there's a range of things that we're talking about, both to boost home ownership and to make sure that those in home ownership gain the benefits they deserve. So if we have time for questions later, I'd be happy to talk more about some of this policy engagement, but I hope this overview is helpful to you. And I want to thank you for having me.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Brian. Are there any questions at this time for Brian?
Texie, this is Luciana. Can I ask a question about the survey? So, Brian, when you guys did the survey about discrimination, was it clarified what would have been considered actual discrimination, since so many people had not answered yes that they recognized or noticed discrimination in real estate? Like, was
That's a
there
good
clarification?
that's a good question. I know that we described the bases of discrimination in the second survey, like the things that are prohibited by the Fair Housing Act, and asked whether they saw discrimination on any of these bases. So it at least made sure that people understood we weren't talking about just, bad treatment or, rude behavior, but actual discrimination on the basis of national origin or gender and the like. But I think it only went that deep. And these were parts of other surveys. So they were sort of riding along with other survey questions. I do hope that we'll soon do a more in-depth survey on fair housing. But just based on this more cursory look at these questions, this is how folks answered it.
Tony?
Yeah, quick question. When you talk about these surveys, you made one in January, the other one was in June, and we got two different results. Would you think that the one in June was kind of like more influenced by the news of what's been going on lately, and is not really that accurate for fair housing? If that makes sense.
That's a good question. I mean, certainly people were much more sensitized to these issues in June, and it was part of a larger survey. It was called a community quality survey that was asking about a range of community issues, including policing, and it was immediately following the death of George Floyd. So it's possible that there was a bump because of that. In the context of other questions, somewhat related, that people may have, inflated their response. We'll, again, I guess, know when we do another survey. I don't know that the other survey questions that we do going forward are going to be, trying to link back to these. We might just do a very different kind of survey. But yeah, I think that's a fair question and a possible result.
One more question also. Actually, I got a couple more, but do we know what kind of impact COVID is going to have on fair housing? And the other question is, you're talking about training. NAR is doing videos and training people about fair housing, but this training is more like in a general nationwide type of thing. But will you guys talking or thinking about doing something more specific by regions, like the culture and the way people is here in Alabama? It's not the same way that we are in New York, or the same way that we were in California. Meaning, living here in one neighborhood is not the same like living in Compton or living in Orange County in California. So those are two different scenarios. Is something that you guys going to be working with local realtors, local associations, to create something more local?
So two good questions. The first question, if I understood it, was COVID and what the COVID impact would be. So, it's early to know, but one of the things that I know I'm concerned about is how COVID is impacting home ownership for different groups. We observe that really in the last decade, a great deal of the homeownership growth, I want to say half of it, is attributable to Hispanic Americans. And if many sources have said, if Hispanic Americans don't recover at the rates of others or don't recover well, that we're going to see a drag on home ownership. And Hispanic millennials were also a group that were really driving up the nation's home ownership numbers.
Yes.
So I am concerned about that. And we don't even have the last quarter's data was just not very helpful because it's just in this pandemic, it's just been hard to get accurate data on home ownership. So I am concerned, and I think we all should be concerned. And I'll just say generally that the housing market really depends on seeing growth from not just Hispanic Americans, but Asian Americans and African Americans, because the home ownership rate for whites is never going to be 100%, and it's already in the high 70s. So we're always going to have a ceiling. And so if we want to see it grow, it's got to grow outward for these other groups. So that's going to be very important that we focus attention on how do we bring in more homeowners, and how do we, at least at a minimum, maintain the upward trend, the slow but upward trend we're seeing with some racial groups. And then in terms of training and localizing it, what we're hoping is with the implicit bias training is that people will, that it's intended for companies to do, wherever they are. And so that is a goal, that people can take this course off the shelf, and we're going to do some training the trainers where they can actually have the opportunity to tailor it. And then with the other trainings, it's going to be online, so it's going to be for individuals. So I think this is what NAR can do. I don't know that we can localize it any better than that, considering how many local organizations there are nationally. But hopefully it can spur some adoption locally.
Brian, I have a question also. This is James Wong from ARIA, and what you said about the appraisal really concerns me, because if you are building up wealth, let's say we don't discriminate, but because of your color on another end, you're getting discriminated and losing equity. I mean, this is what we're trying to build. Have you started talking and working with financial institutions about how to make better, have them make it colorblind also when they do appraisals?
Yeah, James, this is like, it's an area of great concern, because it's basically like the boat taking on water, right? It's like, here people are doing exactly what they should be doing, and they're not gaining the full benefit of it. NAR had a valuation seminar about a month ago where Andre Perry from the Brookings Institution, who's really the leading research on this work, presented some of his findings in this area. And there was a representative from an appraisal institute speaking. And I have to say, I felt like they were talking at cross purposes, because, Andre was saying, here's the data, here's what's happening. I know it shouldn't be happening, but here's what's actually happening. And he estimated that there was about a 28% discount to minority homes, and that shouldn't be there after you factor out everything else. You actually can back out legitimate things that could influence an appraisal. And the fellow from the Appraisal Institute was saying, well, we don't consider this. We don't consider this. We're not able to consider this. It's unethical. That's, by the book, the case, but it appears to be happening. And I think the New York Times story yesterday presented that very compellingly. We do need to engage more. I know the leadership of NAR is very concerned about this. The Fair Housing Policy Committee already has been talking about this and trying to put something together to look at this. I know NAREB is concerned. I would imagine AREA is just as concerned. And I just think this is an issue now, and there was a lot of email yesterday about this, that should be a priority for all of us, because I kind of feel like this is in our control. People are in the houses, and so there's really one or two dimensions to this. This should not be a hard problem. So it's something that I'm hoping in the coming weeks that our leadership will prioritize.
All right, Brian, we appreciate you being here. Also, now Kelly's going to speak. I'm sorry, Kelly, I didn't introduce you from the beginning. But Kelly,
okay.
Go right ahead, okay?
All right.
Thank
you. I
you.
have a question for Brian. Actually, I was going to mention that article as well, because it was very eye-opening to me. It wasn't, if we're not trying to correct you in that sense, it wasn't $40,000. It was a 40% increase. The appraisal went from $300,000 to $445,000, which is highly significant. And basically the article went to say that they sterilized their home, removed everything, went out and redecorated it. And furnishing should not increase the value of real property by $140,000. So I'm glad you guys are in place. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. So just wanted to mention that before I spoke. And I appreciate what you brought before us, Ms. Green. I always appreciate when you speak to us. And I would really like to thank Texie and Phyllis Connell as well for their great job as chair and co-chair of the Global Compliance Committee. I just think that y'all have done a great job because we've been nationally recognized, for those who don't know that. And this is, I think, such a great opportunity for Birmingham and Alabama to share in what we need to share with respect to housing. I am Kelly Gunnels with the Birmingham Association of REALTORs. I'm the current vice president, and will be president next year if I'm alive. And, but on behalf of the Birmingham Association of REALTORs and the governmental affairs, we would like to thank you guys for joining us today. The Birmingham Association prides ourselves on being the voice of real estate in Central Alabama. And we look forward to being a conduit of community, relationship building, diversity, and inclusion. And again, thank you all for your participation in the Global Business Summit today. And Texie, I'll give it back to you.
All right, thank you. Now we would like to welcome Lila Hackett, Director of Fair Housing, and Jack Evans, Fair Housing Specialist. Lila, are you there?
She's online, but she's muted.
Yeah.
All right. I think Jack is going to speak first.
Okay.
Jack, are you with us?
I don't see him there.
We'll come back to him. He's between two activities. He's attending a HUD-sponsored training that he's supposed to be in, I think, from 1 to 3 today. So he was gonna just kind of bounce back between the two. But I am happy to be a part of your training today. And I thought, since I was asked to talk about the history of fair housing and the Fair Housing Act, that I would just kind of do a correlation between the early history of civil rights legislation and the history of fair housing and the Fair Housing Act. Because it's surprising to know that a lot of what was included in the 1968 and 88 amendment to the Fair Housing Act had already been passed in previous years. So to do a brief history of civil rights legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had already been accomplished 100 years earlier. So let's explore some civil rights laws that connect us with the total period. Most people are aware of the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. But most of us, however, don't realize that both had already happened nearly 100 years earlier. So let me read this quote to you. Complete liberty and exact equality in the enjoyment of all civil, political, and public rights should be established and effectually maintained throughout the Union by efficient and appropriate state and federal legislation. Neither the law nor its administration should admit any discrimination in respect of persons by reason of African Americans, creed, color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, this quote sounds like it should come from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it actually came from the Republican Party platform in 1872. This was a big stepping stone in the fight for equal civil rights for Blacks and was certainly not the first. because the first major civil rights law was actually passed in 1866 after the conclusion of the Civil War and nearly 100 years before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this truly landmark legislation stated that citizens of the United States, no matter their color, shall have the same right to make and enforce contracts, to sue, be parties, and give evidence, to inherit, purchase, lease, sell, hold, and convey real and personal property, and to the full and equal benefits of all laws for the security of person and property as is enjoyed by white citizens. So you see, these legislations were passed many, many years ago. And after Republicans passed the civil rights legislation in Congress, it was then sent to President Andrew Johnson, who had assumed power after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And Johnson, who was a Democrat, vetoed this bill. And in less than 2 weeks after that veto, the Senate and the House voted to override Johnson's veto by votes of 33-15 and 122-14 respectively. So now let's talk about, then came the Voters' Rights Bill of 1870. And this was the Civil Rights Law of 1870, which declared and enforced that any person who is qualified to vote in the US shall be entitled and allowed to vote at all such elections without discrimination of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And this bill backed up legislation, and that legislation was the 15th Amendment, which had been ratified only months before. Then there were several other civil rights legislations that were passed, and the next major civil rights bill came in 1875, and it prohibited the discrimination against Blacks in nearly every imaginable circumstance. And I'm going to read a quote from that bill. And it says that all persons within the jurisdiction of the United States shall be entitled to the full and equal and enjoyment of the accommodations, advantages, facilities, and privileges of inns, public conveyances on land and water, theaters, and other places of public amusement, applicable alike to citizens of every race and color, regardless of any previous condition of servitude. And what's amazing about this bill was that it was by 1875, which gave full and equal civil rights for Blacks. They had been passed and signed into law solely by Republicans. The achievements of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we all know had already been realized 90 years earlier. However, there was a Supreme Court decision in 1883, that declared the Civil Rights Law of 1875 unconstitutional. And the court declared almost unanimously that Congress lacked the authority to outlaw discrimination by private citizens and organizations, and that their authority only extended to federal, state, and local governments. This decision opened the door for widespread discrimination and segregation for the next 70 years. So we see that all of the laws that we are hopefully enjoying now had already been passed. But in 1883, they were declared unconstitutional. So for 70 years after that, housing discrimination and voter rights discrimination and all of this discrimination continued. There were many other bills passed. In 1922, the House passed the anti-lynching bill. And in 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 57 was passed and signed into law. It allowed for, voting rights. So that was the first real Voting Rights Act. And it also was largely responsible for the famous bill that was passed in 1964. And as I was reading and researching history of fair housing and the Fair Housing Act and the history of civil rights, it surprised me to learn that the first modern civil rights bill passed between 1957 and 1965 were basically retreads of bills again passed nearly 100 years earlier. And most people can tell you at least something about the civil rights movement in the 60s, but very few people know anything about the same movement that happened in 1860 and the other successors. So to bring us closer to home, on April 11th, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which was meant as a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And to just talk about a little background of that, we know that during this time, it was a time of turmoil, conflict. It took the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King to finally secure the passage. And one important thing that happened, the Kerner Commission warned in 1968 that to continue present policies is to make permanent the division of our country into two societies, one largely Negro and poor, located in the central cities, the other predominantly white and affluent, located in the suburbs and outlying areas. And so we know that the Fair Housing Act was passed with a dual mandate, and first to end desegregation, to end discrimination, and to dismantle the segregated living patterns that characterize most cities. And we know that this is still prevalent in a lot
Lila, you went on mute. You muted.
She might have lost connection with us, possibly. There she's on.
Lila, you still there?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. We know that the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was meant as a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it expanded on previous acts and prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. And then in 1988, the act was amended to add handicap or disability and familial status. So this was Title 8 of the act, is also known as the Fair Housing Act of 1968. As I said, the act came as a result of a long and difficult journey. And from 1966 through 67, Congress regularly considered the Fair Housing Bill, was never able to get enough votes to pass it. And until Dr. King Can you hear me at all?
Yes, we can.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. As I said, the turmoil that was going on in 1968 after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King is what really forced the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And President Johnson did all that he could to force this act to be signed. And we know that Senator Brooks and Kennedy were instrumental in getting this legislation passed. And Senator Brooks talked about when he returned home from World War II that he was unable to find decent and sanitary housing for his family, and he was unable to move into the community that he wanted to live in. And we know that this has continued for years. This is still a problem, and that's the need for the private fair housing centers that are still here in our country. And we are hoping that one day there will be no need for our services, but we know that until the hearts and minds of people are changed, that housing discrimination will continue. I had asked if they would show a very short film that's entitled 7 Days. I'm not sure if they were able to get this.
Connor or Will, do either of y'all have this video? Lila, I'm not sure if they have it.
Okay, it was just, it was called 7 Days. It was a film that was developed by the National Fair Housing Alliance, and it was underwritten by Nationwide Insurance. And it just talks about the 7 days following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and the impact that his assassination had on the country and on Congress in the passing of the Civil Rights Act, of passage of the Fair Housing Act, I'm sorry, of 1968. And I thought that would just be an excellent way to end my presentation on the history of fair housing and the Fair Housing Act.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Lila? Okay, give me just a minute, okay? Okay, we're going to move into a special message from Ben Carson, and Connor's going to take care of getting that loaded up for us.
Just one moment. I'm pulling it up right now. Sorry, I just want to make sure everyone can see this. Okay, and hear it? Can't hear it? Okay, I don't have it playing right now, but y'all can hear it when I did play it earlier, right? Okay, let's see. Give me a thumbs up, Tony. You'll be my test, okay?
Hello, I'm Secretary Ben Carson. Thank you to the During these times, I'm grateful we're able to connect over a virtual platform since we're not able to be together in person. Thank you for all your work to increase access to affordable housing across the community. We are proud of your organization's efforts under the leadership of President Lucas to work with your state and local governments to expand housing opportunities for the residents of Birmingham and the greater Jefferson County area. You, the local leaders, entrepreneurs, investors, and business professionals have the power to make a difference. And we appreciate your work in helping make the American dream a reality for all. At HUD, we understand that stable housing is the key to a stable life. A strong nation depends on strong communities. Strong communities depend on strong families. And ultimately, strong families depend on strong homes. For some Americans, however, access to affordable housing has remained out of reach. In many places, housing supply has simply not kept pace with demand, often due to cumbersome and expensive government regulations. The coronavirus pandemic has only exacerbated these difficulties. With rents rising faster than incomes, we need to bring everybody to the table to produce more affordable housing and ease the pressure that is forcing too many of our neighbors into our shelters and onto our streets. This is not just a federal problem, it's everybody's problem. Just over a year ago, in June of 2019, President Trump established the White House Council on Eliminating Regulatory Barriers to Affordable Housing to respond to this need for more affordable housing. I have the privilege to chair the council, which coordinates efforts across 8 federal member agencies. We understand that regulations are often necessary to protect the health and safety of American citizens, such as clean air, water, or disaster mitigation practices. However, outdated, overly time-consuming, and costly requirements prolong the completion of new housing supply, and those costs are shifted to the consumer, particularly in tight markets. Over the last year, we have engaged with governments at all levels, as well as other private sector and nonprofit stakeholders, to learn about the impact of the more cumbersome and duplicative regulations. Before the coronavirus changed our plans to continue a nationwide bus tour focused on the work of the council, we visited a Clayton manufacturing plant in Russellville, Alabama, and had a great discussion about the importance of manufactured housing with Governor Kay Ivey. We want to encourage communities to scale back overly burdensome regulations that impede the development of affordable housing. Later this summer, we will submit a report to President Trump outlining our findings about the impact of regulations upon the prices of housing. This formula of eliminating regulatory barriers to affordable housing, coupled with the exciting new innovations in manufactured housing, has the potential to put the American dream back in the reach for wide swaths of the country. It is always good to see groups like yours that understand the problem and are taking steps to work toward a solution. I commend you for your efforts, and I look forward to seeing more success stories from the great state of Alabama. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Connor. So we don't have the opportunity to have any questions to Ben Carson, but I really appreciated him having that video for us to see. He's a great speaker and a great leader. At this time, we're going to go ahead and move on to the state of minority real estate. Jessica's not going to be here, so we're going to have James to take her place. Also, Tony, if you'll go ahead and start this off, that would be great. There'll be Tony, Marcus, and James.
Okay, not a problem. Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Alvarez. I'll be talking a little bit about the state of the Hispanic real estate here, specifically here in Alabama. One of the things that goes hand to hand with the fair housing is that Alabama, between 2010 and 2018, Alabama led the country, is the top state, #1, with a 20% increase of Hispanics home ownership. So there is no other state in the whole country that has increased home ownership for the Hispanics, but Alabama. And that means that almost 51% of the population, of Hispanic population here in Alabama, are buying properties, either for live in the houses or for rentals. They are buying properties, and that's a market that is increasing. That's something that Brian mentioned about the millennials, Hispanics. They got, according to NAREP, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, there is a 4.9 million mortgage-ready Hispanic millennials in the United States. And there is a whole lot of these 4.9 million here in Alabama. Believe it or not, we're working with many of them. And, you know, this is something very important. One of the things that we still seeing over here that is related to the fair housing has to do with the steering. Many local realtors still making the mistake of giving their own opinion and talking about which areas they could leave, which areas they're not leaving, talking about what good schools are, what bad schools are. We as a realtor, is not our position. That is it goes against the Fair Housing Act. We cannot talk about that. And when our clients ask us about how the school district, what areas are good, nice, or safe, what neighborhoods are good, nice, and safe, usually realtors use their own opinion about what that means. And probably with not thinking about it, we are committing against the Fair Acting Act. And you know, that can be unintentionally steering people out of the certain neighborhoods, and we shouldn't be doing that. One of the things that we're facing here in Alabama is we don't have enough bilingual professionals who speak Spanish and English to work either on the mortgage profession or as a realtors, although it's increasing right now. We have a lot of new realtors that bilinguals working here in Birmingham, but still is not enough. And we're trying to recruit and educate some of those realtors to let them know that the Fair Housing Act is something that we need to follow through. It's nothing about being cultural. It's nothing about that's the way we are, that's the way we raise. It's just the law, and we need to obey, and it's something that we need to follow through. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Tony. We're going to go ahead and move on to Marcus. Marcus, are you still with us? You may have had to step out. So,
Yeah, he had to step out for just a moment. He'll be right back in just a moment.
okay, James, let's go ahead and move on to you. Jessica's not going to be here today, so James is taking her place.
Thank you so much for having me back. I will share also the State of Asia America report for everyone, so you can download it and take a look. And so ARIA is an organization founded in 2003 for the sustainable home ownership for the AAPI community. We have 41 chapters and over 17,000 members. And one of the things that we did this year for the State of Asia America report is disaggregate the data for the Asians and the Pacific Islanders. So if you look at our study, you will see there's a wide difference from as high as 68% with home ownership for Taiwanese, and then as low as 25% for micro-Asians. So there is a broad difference. When everyone says Asians, they kind of lump everyone together from the Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and all these different markets. And right now, there is a tremendous amount of Asians moving into the Midwest and the South, mostly for the affordability, where many AAPIs, they start in the gateway cities where the large Asian populations are at. And once they understand it, they really need to move to a more affordable area, an area with good schools, good opportunity, and good jobs. As I know last time we spoke about a lot of car companies, and I learned something new, that the Koreans actually had a lot of influence in Alabama. And from that, with the Japanese and other Korean car companies, a lot more of the Asians, especially Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, are moving to Alabama and the South because of the job opportunities and the affordability. One of the things about the AAPI community is that our loans are very large, mostly because of where we're located on the West Coast and East Coast, where the price points are very high. And it is not uncommon to see the AAPI community having multiple co-signers on a loan. And we use the conventional loans more than anything else at 92%. So that was one of the issues that we wanted, is to make sure conventional loans and GSE reforms were not altered or changed, since the AAPI community uses them at such a high amount. It is through education, because we do speak about 51 different languages and 26 different ethnicities. That language is a big issue to understand, really going through the process of buying a home, and then also understanding what you're signing on the mortgage application. So a lot of times, because the children speak English and the parents don't, it is not uncommon to hear somebody, the best person that could speak English would show up at the signing with their parents and kind of telling them what to sign, where to sign, and what does that mean. So, one of the things that we've been fighting for and advocating is really the language access, to let people understand that, what are they signing, and not having a kid under 18 trying to translate for their parents. But also, Tony brought up a good point, and I'm glad NAR is addressing where it comes to finance, that a lot of times more AAPIs could be available if we used a different scoring system. We would have at least 3 million more AAPIs ready to purchase a home. And I think it would unlock about 30 million, so a huge potential of more first-time home buyers if we use a different way of scoring credit. Many of the AAPI communities do not like to borrow money. They don't understand it. They think it's a bad thing. While in the US, building credit, right? It's building credit is a good thing, but they don't understand that. They usually don't like to owe debt to anybody. So even if there's a car, they'll save up, they'll borrow from their family members to just buy it all cash and then pay each other. And that's how they usually work around. But it's really through the education of AREA. We're trying to teach them, we're trying to educate, we're trying to advocate, so more and more people can understand, really the process of buying a home and getting a mortgage and building up credit. So, those are some of the things that AREA is helping with sustainable home ownership. But I like to hear, but helping all communities grow. And I am very strong with the fair housing, that we do need to follow the act with the accountability, the culture, and the training. It is so important, but also with what NAR is doing, making sure the finance is correct and the appraisal is correct. Because if you're doing everything right and you're building up credit, and somebody comes to your house and looks at pictures or something like that, and they're giving you less value, that just is crazy. And I definitely will bring it up and get AREA's support for everything that we're trying to accomplish here, and helping each other, uplift each other. Because during this time too of COVID, I know the Asian American community, the hate crimes have been going up. And also now they're afraid to move in certain communities where they normally wouldn't feel afraid before, but now of what's going on with the anti-Asian kind of sentiments and maybe some rhetoric and everything else going on, they're holding off from moving to neighborhoods and affordable areas and just staying put of where they are. So I hope everyone has the opportunity to pull down the State of Asia America report. It's a really good report. It does break it down to regions. And if you are interested in understanding the Asian American community, it does give you a lot of data. And if you're open to learning more about AREA, I know we have a Birmingham chapter there. So please join, please reach out to me anytime if you just like a discussion or collaborate. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Do we have any questions for James? All right, I see that Marcus has joined us again. Marcus, can we move on with you?
Certainly. And I apologize for having to step away. I had a short notice for a really important call that I thought was only going to take about 10 minutes. It took a little bit longer, but that's real estate for you. So thank you. I don't know how much I missed, but again, just being fair housing, I'll just kind of touch briefly on what we're doing as far as the Birmingham Realtors Association Of course, we're the local chapter, a local board of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, NAREB. And so, again, can you hear me okay, everybody? Okay. So one of the things that we're working with, education, financial literacy, the most recent numbers that came out did show an increase in home ownership numbers among African Americans, but at the same time, it showed an increase across the board. And so the one thing that did not happen is the approximately 30% gap in home ownership versus from Black Americans versus non-Hispanic white Americans is still at that consistent 30% gap that we've been trying to close for several years. And so, we're still working with that. There's been some bills introduced, the American Dream Down Payment Act that was introduced into the Senate. NAREB played a big part in introducing that bill. And so we're still hoping to get that pushed through, which is, our biggest challenge, down payment. And so still trying to make sure we can kind of, push through for that to close that gap. And one of the challenges, there was an interesting article, news story that's been circulating today. I don't know if anyone has seen that. I think it was on First Coast News, where there was an individual or a couple whose appraisal, I think we were just talking about low appraisals, had a very low appraisal on their property. And upon a second appraisal where they removed anything, family pictures and things of that nature that indicated who lived in the home, that second appraisal resulted in a 40% increase in the value. And based on the market where they are, I think it was at Florida, over $100,000 difference in the appraisal after the second appraisal came through. And so that indicated a little bit more than just incompetence. There seemed to be some other factors involved in that. And so we're still, kind of on the forefront and battlefront of trying to address issues like that. But I think James mentioned the report that that ARIA has. There is a report on the NAREB website, that we refer to as the SHEBA report, State of Housing in Black America report, that goes in and talks about lending disparities and any patterns that we have that we may see, the home ownership rates and things of that nature. And so, that's kind of our work. Democracy in housing is our slogan, and we still, 73 years later, we're still pushing for democracy in housing. We think that issues like what we just saw with the appraisals that were mentioned and the gaps in home ownership, all of those factors still show that that there's a need for the service that we provide and the mission that we strive for. And so we're still working here locally. It's not just locally, rather nationally. We're focusing on a large number of millennials that we found to be credit ready, mortgage ready, but just for whatever reason, they're not on homes. They have the earnings. And so we're focusing with our House in the Car campaign on millennials and late year Gen Xers to talk about the importance of home ownership. And, I actually just reached out. There's some other things that we're going to be working on as far as that's disparities as far as the consumer, but just reached out when it comes to real estate professionals and educating our young people on the opportunities within the industry, not just sales, but lending and other areas of the business. So that's kind of going to be, one of our focuses going forward. I don't know if there was anything else that I needed to touch on. Like I said, I'm sorry I had to break away. So if there are any questions for me, I'm going to open it.
All right, thank y'all so much. I mean, in my personal opinion, I think education is so important. We need to educate more and more people. I mean, I've been in real estate for several years now, and there's still so many people I come in contact with that have no clue that they could buy a house. They then, you know, I get calls still from people that want to rent. And I ask them, well, why do you think you have to rent? Well, I don't know. I have to give them a little bit of, you know, education over the phone and get them somewhere, and they find out that they can buy. So educating the people is so important. It's so important. So the more we can get this word out to people and letting them know that there's help out there for the Asian population, the Hispanic population. I mean, you know, all that is so important. So I appreciate all of y'all joining us today. I think that I'm not sure if Connor, you and William have anything you'd like to say.
We do have one last topic, which is the Fair Housing Declaration, if you're ready for us.
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, well, let me just share my screen. Give me 1 second.
While you're sharing your screen, Connor, this is Lushana. Can I just ask a question or make a comment about educating the people? I think the education really needs to be among a lot of the agents, because a lot of agents, like, we try, I'm going to say this nicely, we try not to see color, and we shouldn't see color, but in real life we have to, because there are cultural differences among people. So, you know, I've found that I've come in contact with a lot of people that come from generations of renters, and they have no idea how to even go about being a homeowner. And so we have as agents have to be, I guess for a lack of a better word, have to be either compassionate towards that kind of mindset, because you're going to have to do a lot of hand holding and a lot of, like you said, educating with those people that don't know what that process is. And I have found that we as agents don't always embrace that. We might walk away for something that's a little bit quicker, a little bit easier, and we have to be more patient with people that don't necessarily look like we look and things like that. So I wish there were more people on the call that could hear what different demographics of people actually go through and what their hesitation is to move forward in the home buying process, because some people really have adequate fears of that process because they've never known anybody to go through that process. That's all.
Thank you so much. Just understand that fair housing isn't just about ensuring discrimination, making sure that ensuring discrimination doesn't happen, but also promoting the American dream of equality and equal home ownership based on a purchasing process. Will has called the Fair Housing Act 1968 good trouble, and we would like to ensure that we continue to have good trouble. BAR supports and endorses fair housing and those who advocate thereof. We want to thank our many speakers for today, as well as the Fair Housing Committee is going to be asking all of our members of our association to sign the Fair Housing Declaration you see before you, shared on the screen, and we will be sending it out via email asking that they all sign it to show their support.
That sounds great, Connor. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody joining us today. Is this on one page, Connor, on this?
This is on one page.
And you'll have a place for signatures?
Yes, we will get that taken care of. It'll go out through email. I don't know how soon, but I know that it is in our schedule.
Okay. And if any of the people that have joined us today would like to become part of our Fair Housing Committee, please feel free to. If you know anybody that would like to be part of the Fair Housing Committee, please get them in contact with us. We'd love to have more and more members on this committee. I think it's an important committee, I really do. So I appreciate everybody for being here today. I'm not sure, but I think that's about all we have for now. Is that correct, Connor?
That is correct, unless Jack hopped on, in which case he could get a last word, but I don't think he did.
No,
He didn't. Okay, well, thank you all. And Tony, you have something?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. It's very important that we do this more often and educate ourselves of what's going on and to stay updated of things that happen. We need to cooperate and collaborate with each other and trying to avoid any problems when it comes to fair housing. And also I want to thank Connor and William. That declaration is something that we talked the other day, and it's very important that we sign it and share with people in our brokerage, get our brokers involved on this. Like I say, involuntarily, many of us, we do break the rules of the fair housing, and let's try not to do that on the best of our abilities. So hope to see you guys again. James, good to see you again. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.